Hi, thank you for coming to our podcast today. My name is Lee. I'm Communication Studies faculty member at Bellevue College. I'm also the college's Study Abroad Coordinator at the Washington Community College Consortium for Study Abroad, or otherwise known as WCCCSA. I've been working at BC for a decade now, and I work with a lot of faculty who are curious about possibilities of teaching abroad, particularly in destination France. So we're very lucky today that we invited a special guest to our podcast who not only taught abroad, but also in particular taught abroad in France, and especially most impressively taught in France in French. He is a nationally recognized scholar, historian, researcher when it comes to French Revolution, and published a lot of work in that topic and given lectures around the world. So we're just lucky to have 10 minutes with him, and I will introduce Professor and Dr. Jeff Horn from the Social Science Division, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, Lee. It's wonderful to join you here to talk about study abroad. My name is Jeff Horn. I'm Dean of Social Science here at Bellevue College. I've only been here a few months, but I'm excited to contribute to the offerings of study abroad.
Thank you, Jeff. We're very happy that we get to spend time with you today. Could you tell us a little bit about your overall experience teaching in France?
Teaching in France is an interesting experience because so many Americans are used to bringing groups of students there. And that's a really fun thing. But I mostly did something else. I mostly taught for the Erasmus program. That is an European-wide organization that brings together students from across the EU. And so I was teaching them at a French university, the Université de Rouen 2, and I did that for 3 years. And I taught several courses on Napoleon and another course on the French Revolution. And teaching the French Revolution in French to French people is a lot of fun and can be one of those moments that you look back on and think, you know, it was really cool that I got to do. So that's the outline. What do you want to know more about?
I want to know more about what makes it especially interesting, like you said, to teach French Revolution to French people.
The thing that's really fascinating about talking about any major event like the French Revolution, the American Revolution, World War II, is always a matter of perspective, as well as a matter of presentation. So when thinking about perspective, the things that Americans generally find most interesting about the French Revolution is not the battles, it's not the blood, it's not the gore. It's about opportunity, possibility, integration of new groups, democracy, possibilities for women. Those are the topics that have always drawn me to the study of them. But that wasn't the French Revolution that the French people had learned about. You know, they knew every battle. They knew every war. And to me, that's not the center of what makes the revolution so interesting. So getting them to think about their own history through the lens of somebody who has given their life to studying it and has a different perspective on it was a lot of fun, I think, for the students. And for me, it was wonderful to see, you know, the eyes get really wide at completely different moments than when American students do. And to have it be a European-wide audience, I had students from Poland and Germany and Ireland, Spain, Italy, alongside the French, and to see what they had been taught. And it was a way of thinking about the French Revolution that nobody had quite had before. But it was also a matter of presentation, because when the French talk about the revolution, they don't really think of it in argument. They don't really put it, they don't really have a thesis when they give a lecture. They're much more descriptive. So my more analytic oriented lectures really were striking to them. And when I would lead us through discussions of primary sources, that wasn't something that they were used to. And it gave the European students an appreciation for American pedagogy and for what university education looked like in a different part of the world.
Thank you, Jeff. And I think I'm really intrigued with one thing in particular you have said about somebody giving their life into the study of the French Revolution. You must have compared different versions of learning experiences. You learn about the French Revolution through historical texts like primary and secondary sources, and you probably also watched films and movies, and you looked at oil paintings, and then you visited the location, you talked to people. So across all of those versions of learning experience, how would you compare them? And if one person only get to learn about the French Revolution in only one way, and this is tough to pick, but which one would you recommend?
Ooh, that's a hard one. Thinking about the French Revolution it's so vast. You can't really compare it to the American Revolution because the American Revolution is such a smaller event. There were less than 2.5 million people in the 13 colonies when they rebelled against the 28 million in France, as well as the 200 million who were directly affected by it around the world. One's much more of a global event. So when I think about kind of what really excites me about thinking about the revolution, with all due respect to your interest in film, it's never film. Film to me is, for an historical topic like that, less important. I do enjoy hearing some of the music from the era, to hear somebody sing the Carmagnole, or to dance it, or the Ça ira. Think about Rouget de Lille's The Marseillaise. That I find very stirring. But for me, it's the primary source. When you hear people, at least in your own head, saying these words and thinking about the enormous importance of language and how that language literally changed the world, that equality, fraternity, democracy really took on their meaning from the French Revolution. It's reading those words, thinking about what they meant in context, and thinking about what they mean today. That's why I have given my life to the study of French.
See, thank you. And just to clarify, it won't hurt my feeling. It's never the film. I totally understand and I get the point. If we go back to the idea of somebody actually go abroad and learn about French Revolution and teach about French Revolution in today's time, I know you can be incredibly physically present because you are there. But then, do you ever feel challenged or difficult to make the content still current to today's students?
No, that's actually one of the easiest things to do when you're in an historical venue, because Americans are not used to seeing things 4,000 years old all around them. So if you go to the Place de la Révolution in Paris, where the guillotine was, and you show them kind of, okay, in pictures, the guillotine is sited here, but it wasn't. It was much closer to the river so that the blood would flow into the Seine. And what's there now? Well, an obelisk that was taken from Luxor in Egypt, by Egypt. You can talk about France as an imperial power. You can talk about the invasion of Egypt. In front of you, you have National Assembly, which was built as the home of a Prince of the Blood. Behind you, you have the Louvre. So you've got history all around you. And if you can't make that come alive, not trying very.
Thank you. And I agree with you. And I really like how visual and spatial immediately, and it must be a treat learning from an expert like you while study abroad. We've heard so many highlights so far from your experience teaching in France. I'm equally curious about those lower points or challenges if if there's anything that will quickly come to your mind. Have you ever been through any of those moments that you wonder why I'm doing this?
Well, of course you do, just as you do in any class or in any teaching environment. Teaching is always kind of a conglomeration of the highs and the lows, and you try and make sure that the highs outnumber the lows. So when teaching Europeans, one of the things that is really interesting is they are trained to write in a very specific way. And it is very descriptive. It is incredibly teen. And they struggle to do anything other than that. They have literally been trained in that since they were children. So getting them to think more analytically, getting them to inject themselves into the analysis, that can be frustrating because they're just not used to it, and they get frustrated with the idea. Having them write à l'américaine can be challenging. With Americans, the issue is many of them don't really want to learn about the culture. They just want to sightsee. They don't want to necessarily be exposed to the history and culture. And so when you're excited about saying, and this was the place that you first encounter the city of Paris as you're coming up the river, and they're just wanting to look at the pretty pictures, and sometimes that can be a little frustrating. But if you think about your itinerary with care, you take advantage of space and place, and you bring your own joy, you can bring them along.
I like that. And thanks for sharing your strategies and maybe tips for our future instructors teaching abroad, particularly in France. And I know a lot of faculty members on BC campus are curious about that particular endeavor, bringing students to France. And they probably are afraid of a lot of unknown challenges, and they probably have never taken students abroad. They themselves haven't visited France just yet. They are somehow curious about the adventure though, and they're almost ready. Maybe they only need the final push. So if you will say one thing at the end of today's podcast as your final push, what might that be?
How can you pass up an opportunity to eat that well?
Okay. Thank you. And with that, we're ready to conclude today's podcast. Thank you for being with us. This is about teaching abroad, in particular, destination France. And I was so lucky that we get to talk to Professor Jeff Horn, and he's the Dean of the Social Science Division, but he's also a nationally recognized scholar and expert, historian when it comes to French Revolution. His work is widely cited, and we're just lucky to have him join our campus, and I feel especially lucky that I get to talk to him today at the podcast. And we hope to have more of this coming up soon. And if you're curious about teach abroad and what it is like to teach abroad in France and in anywhere else, stay tuned and we'll have more to share coming up soon. My name is Lee. I'm the Communication Studies faculty member on campus. I'm also the Study Abroad Coordinator.
Thanks for having me, Lee. It's been wonderful to think back to some of the best teaching experiences of my life, and I hope that I have helped to convince people to take the plunge and give it a shot. I'm Jeff Horn. I'm Dean of Social Science. Thanks for having me.